At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Hey, Immigrantly family, this is Saadia Khan. Today, I am feeling reflective again, and when I get like this, I turn to this mic, to all of you, to speak honestly. There's so much noise around conflict lately. So many people chanting for the other side's defeat, caught up in slogans and headlines, and every time it's framed as the right thing. Defense, justice, pride, revenge. But in all of it, our shared humanity gets lost. We start to forget that real people, often the most vulnerable, pay the price. War gets sold as strength. Peace gets dismissed as weakness. But here's the truth. Peace is hard. It takes courage. It takes work. But it's the only way forward that doesn't leave us emptier in the end. Oscar Wilde said, and I quote, "As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination. When it is looked upon as vulgar, it will cease to be popular." That hits me every time. Let's make war vulgar. And today, I am choosing to say peace matters, especially when it's hard. And now to our today's episode. Now, this episode is about legacy, the kind that doesn't always make the history books, but lives on in quiet acts of defiance, in chosen families, in joy that insists on existing. My guest is Caro De Robertis, a Uruguayan American novelist, professor, and cultural force whose work has always pushed boundaries. Their latest book, So Many Stars, is a stunning oral history that uplifts the voices of queer and trans elders of color, activists, artists, everyday revolutionaries whose stories are rarely centered but deeply necessary. It's a collective memory project, a love letter to survival and a challenge to how we understand resilience. Caro weaves together these voices with tenderness and power, and in doing so gives us all a deeper sense of what it means to belong. Caro and I will be talking about what it really means to be seen, to speak, and to be remembered. So without further ado, let's get started. Caro, can I say something to you? You have such positive energy I've been feeling down lately and I feel all excited, energized, happy. Oh, you are a ray of sunshine.
Means so much to hear. I know these times are so difficult and brutal and painful and tumultuous for so many of us, particularly immigrants and trans people. I mean, are among the people who are most brutally targeted in this moment. So we deserve rays of sunshine and to bring them to each other in our communities.
So, we'll talk about your book. But before we do that, take me back to your childhood. I know you came to the US when you were 10. What state, which city, what was it like? And what brought your parents here?
I came to this country when I was 10 years old. I was actually born in England. My parents are Uruguayan from the South American country of Uruguay, but they left South America when my mother was pregnant with me. So the way I think of it is that I immigrated in the womb. And I was sort of born already an immigrant, to an immigrant family. We went to England because my father had a postdoctoral position. So he was part of the brain drain that we know has shaped a lot of immigrant families. And it's sort of complex and layered. They didn't flee the dictatorship in Uruguay, and yet it was the era of the dictatorship. And so simultaneously, there was opportunity in the so-called first world, and yet also there was a shutting down of what was possible in life in their country. So I think that's true for a fair number of immigrants. Many of us, people are very clearly fleeing, or people are very clearly seeking opportunity. And sometimes there is a complex mix.
Absolutely. And people don't often talk about that. And I've said this on this podcast immigrant journeys are so different and varied, and some immigrant journeys are more privileged than others. And it seems like for your parents, if I could use the word privilege in a way, it was a more privileged journey compared to people who were probably fleeing, right?
Absolutely more privileged journey. My parents had working class childhoods, but my father got a PhD. And that is a very privileged way to leave the country. And then he became a professor in Switzerland. So from age 5 to 10, I lived in Switzerland. I'm here to report that my experience of it was as an extremely xenophobic country.
I'm not surprised though.
I mean, people think, oh, Switzerland, Alps and skiing. Yes, but if you're thrown into the public schools of a small town and you don't speak fluent German, the bullying is very intense of the immigrant kid, which is what I was. So I carry in my body all of these memories, right, of being othered in different contexts. So then from Switzerland, we came to the United States when I was 10 to Southern California. I now make my home in Northern California. And I've lived in California my whole adult life, with the exception of a year and a half. I went back to live in Uruguay, in my country of origin.
How was that experience like?
It was pretty incredible. It was 2012 to 2014. I moved there with my wife at the time and our very small children. And, we came out to so many people. And I had a lot of reservations about being an openly queer couple in Uruguay. But Uruguay legalized gay marriage while we were living there before the United States did. And that kind of inverts some of the assumptions that I think people often project on immigrants, right? That we come from the backwards country. So another thing I'll add, because it is relevant to the book that we're talking about today, So Many Stars and trans and genderqueer life experiences, is that I have estrangement in my family of origin and a total disownment due to familial homophobia, which is a term coined by the writer Sarah Schulman, which has been a very important term for me, that homophobia and transphobia, exist within systems of injustice and institutional systems, but they also exist in families. And not all immigrant families, have familial homophobia or familial transphobia. But for those of us who do, there's this incredible feeling of already feeling like an outsider. You want to feel a sense of refuge in your family, and then within your own family, you're othered. And so that was part of my journey.
Was that the reason you moved to Uruguay?
We moved to Uruguay at the time. So my wife at the time, with whom I had my kids, actually got a Fulbright scholarship to do some research in Uruguay. And we said, well, let's go and let's do it. But it was also a very personal journey for me. I had been writing novels set in Uruguay, tracing the experiences of women and of queer people during and before and after the dictatorship there. My own personal project as a novelist has been deeply entwined with uh, exploring what it means to have belonging in our country of origin, what it means to have belonging and a feeling of home when we have a country of origin that we experience deeply in our skin, but don't always have outside of our skin when we're living that immigrant experience. And, for me, it's wrapped up with that intersection of the queer and immigrant experience of how do I create my own feeling of belonging in a culture of origin where perhaps the queerness and the transness that has always been there in every country, in every culture and time period throughout history has not always been visible and has perhaps been actively silenced. How do we make our sense of rootedness as immigrant queer and trans?
What did you discover in Uruguay?
Wow. So, when I was in my mid-20s in 2001, I was in the process of being disowned by my parents, and they gave me this message where they said, you cannot be Uruguayan anymore because Uruguayans aren't gay. You can't be gay and Uruguayan. So they sort of implied that they were.
So they basically took away that right from you, which I don't think they have the right to take away that right.
Yes, yes. We are here to say to all children of immigrants and all people who immigrate as kids and who might perceive, those of us who perceive our parents as kind of the gatekeepers of our culture of origin, we are here to say your culture of origin belongs to you and your parents cannot take it away.
And as an immigrant parent, I can attest to it. And I don't think I can ever take that away from my kids.
Right. And we see that, now I have my kids who are born here in the United States, and I look at the ways that I want to pass on culture to them, and also in a manner that doesn't just say, well, I'm closer to the culture because, I wasn't born here, but also saying, this is yours. It's already yours. I'm showing it to you, but I'm not bestowing it on you. It's already here.
That makes so much sense. Yeah.
It's our heritage. It's our inheritance. How do we own that inheritance if we feel distant from it, as some children of immigrants or folks who immigrated as children might feel? And so I sort of went on this journey in 2001 to try to, in some ways prove my parents wrong, but something larger than that in order to find that intersection of, I want to be queer and Uruguayan. I don't want to have to choose. I don't want to leave my Latinidad at the door to be queer. And I don't want to leave my queerness at the door to be within Latinidad or Uruguayanness. I went to Uruguay, and through a friend of a friend, I connected with a lesbian, a generation older than me, and with her community of people, and started listening to their stories about how they came out to each other in the 70s in the dictatorship and turned to each other for friendship and survival. And I thought their story was so incredible. I befriended them. Years later, I found out that their stories were not documented anywhere, even in Spanish, even in Uruguay. I studied the Uruguayan dictatorship for 18 years, and the number of books I found that included LGBTQ plus experience was zero. So I ultimately wrote a novel, Cantoras, inspired by these women's lives after listening to them for 15 years.
But now you've written a book that's really oral histories of all the elders.
So this book, So Many Stars, An Oral History of Trans, Non-Binary, Genderqueer, and Two-Spirit People of Color, first of all, was an incredible labor of love, and gathering these stories through interviews and then later weaving them into a book has been one of the greatest honors of my life. And it started through a fellowship, a Baldwin Emerson Fellowship, for which I was selected. She said, this is in a way a continuation of your work, which I thought was really profound, to then gather stories of queer and trans BIPOC elders in the United States. As part of the fellowship, we received training and state-of-the-art equipment to gather interviews. Feel incredibly lucky to have gotten training from these oral historians that helped open me up to new tools, but also helped me see the ways that I had informally been engaging oral history through my work as a writer, and how this was a continuation.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
I started reading this book a couple of days ago, and I was so impressed as I was reading. I was like, oh my gosh, these stories are so powerful. And I kept thinking, I hope, I can do justice to this conversation through the interview. But what really struck me was how all the elders that you've interviewed, at least the few that I've read, all of them knew from a very young age that they were different. And that difference manifests in different ways, in how they're seeing themselves, their physical self, how they're seeing their mental self, how they are interacting internally and having that dialogue. Can you talk a little bit about the people that you interviewed? Was there a moment when they were hesitant to tell their stories?
So overall, people were incredibly open and generous with their stories. Certainly, some people got a little nervous, having this microphone positioned in front of them and really being invited to go deep with their stories. And even some of the people like Bambi Salcedo, who's one of the immigrants in the book, just an absolute icon as the founder of the Trans Latina Coalition. She, has been on an HBO translist documentary about trans leaders. She has been interviewed a great deal, in other words, as one of the more high profile people in the book. And yet there were moments in our interview where, as she was invited to go deeper, which is part of what oral history offers us, is this kind of portal into intimacy and into valuing what might seem like a very everyday story. A moment in your childhood where you experienced gender euphoria, the well-being and joy that comes from being in alignment with your true gender. Some of those moments might externally look very simple, not the stuff of documentaries, and yet they can be, revolutionary inside of us. And so it was very beautiful to watch somebody like Bambi Salcedo kind of open into the intimacy.
Another recurring theme that I saw throughout these conversations was how resistant parents were, right? A lot of times parents either did not understand or they ignored it. They didn't want to know what their children were going through. Now, to me, as a parent, I have two girls. I sometimes feel that we are a product of our conditioning. We are parents, yes, but we are also humans. And we all have grown up in societies or cultures, and we've been conditioned to believe in certain things that we consider right or wrong, that are acceptable norms or not. And sometimes, just out of fear for our kids, we want their lives to be simpler. And in the process, we cause so much harm to them by not accepting them the way they are. Did you ever pause and think about how you are presenting parents and their perspective?
Yes, absolutely. I thought so much about parents and parents of potentially trans or genderqueer or non-binary kids while I was weaving this book, because the well-being of younger generations of trans and non-binary folks can be shaped by parents, by teachers, by loving adult presences. And the people in this book, as really deeply all too often know too much about how traumatizing it can be to not get that affirmation in the mirror. I know how traumatizing that can be, as I have shared. And I went on this journey of being able to really refute this idea that it is Uruguayan to be straight or cis, right? That kind of conflation, which I will say, I have had conversations with friends who are immigrants from completely different countries who have also had that experience of having older generations say to them, well, this is a US invention, this idea that you can be trans or queer, or this isn't part of our culture, because of course it's not necessarily visible in the inherited parts of our culture. And it can be very difficult for parents to sort out what is what inside of that. And I think sometimes when we want to shape what we want for our kids and what we want them to be, we can be coming from a place of fear for our kids. I think one of the really moving portrayals in this book is, for me personally, is Sharon Grayson, who is a Black trans woman in her, late 70s. And, she transitioned in the 1960s, which we really don't get to hear enough about. And she talks about, being about 14 years old and her mother, who was this, little old Black lady in Houston, Texas in the 1950s. And so to have this little Black, I say little, I don't know if she was physically little, but I just think of this wonderful Black lady in Texas in the 1950s. She has not been given any language for, LGBTQ plus existence. And she just looks at her child and says, I know you're different. And I know, in some way she acknowledged her child's femininity and said, I love you and I love you no matter what. The one thing that makes me really sad about this is it's hard enough to be Black in this society. And now there's going to be one more thing you have to carry. And I know that is a pain that a lot of people of color, parents of color, feel when they're confronted with the transness or queerness of their child. And I think this is something that sometimes, to be honest, like white culture doesn't entirely understand about the people of color part, how painful it is. It's already hard enough for you to face racism, and for immigrants, xenophobia. And now you're going to face these other things too. And this protective impulse can come up in us. But, Sharon Grayson's mother in the 50s in Texas showed us how it can be done, which is to say, so that just means you're going to need extra love and support. And here I am. So my hope is that this book will have pathways and entry points for today's parents, and particularly parents of color and immigrant parents, but all parents who see transness or queerness in their child. If they can deepen their understanding of what it means to offer love and support to your child the way they really are, and how good it can feel if you are trans or queer, as I, identify as both. Words, it's hard to express in words how good it can feel to be whole and to be free inside and to affirm your whole self and be loved as your whole self. There's nothing like it.
So let me ask you this. In an ideal world, how would you want your parents to love you?
I would want them to convey that they love me no matter what, and that they want to see me as I really, truly am. That they're willing to listen to me express who and what I am, and then ask me what support I need and love me as that. I think children, including adult children, I'm 49 years old. I'm about to turn 50. And I look at my peers who are in their 40s and 50s and have loving relationships with their parents, and I see they are still nourished by that. So I've gone through, my whole adult life without that love. And I know what that is. And I have found a rootedness and a belonging in the world and an ability to heal so that I can love my children wholly. But I know there's no bigger gift that a parent could ever give their child than to say, I want to see you as all of who you are. And then I want to embrace and celebrate who you really are. Thank you for being in this world the way you are. Thank you for showing me who you are. It's like it's so simple, but if we can do that, and there might be work that some of us as parents have to do away from our kids to work through some of the ways we might feel disappointment or fear about who they're showing us that they are. It could be queerness or transness, or it could be, you want your kid to academically excel, and maybe they're just not a very academic kid, and they're going to have a different kind of life path. Can you love them and see them the way they really are? They need that so much.
Caro, but on the flip side, do you think kids have created spaces for their parents to understand, to question, to be vulnerable with them? Is there judgment both ways?
So my kids I have a preteen and a teenager right now. So they have plenty of ways that they judge their parents.
Look, I have two girls. Yeah, I get it.
There will be times when our kids will be in life stages where they're rolling their eyes at us, and they might think that we're cringe or, all of those kinds of things. And I think absolutely as parents, we need to navigate places where our kids can't fully see us, or our kids have strong judgments about what we're saying and doing. And sometimes we still need to hold the boundary about the bedtime or the candy or whatever the other thing might be, or the drug use or the serious things. They might come at us and go, "Oh, you're so uptight." Well, we're still holding that boundary. And then I just think when it comes to something like queerness or transness, they might come at us with judgment. They might not be very available to hear our doubts or our questions or our curiosities. Because sometimes our curiosity or well, I really don't know about this, it might inadvertently cause them some hurt. They might not have a lot of patience. For example, a young person who's using they, them pronouns. This could be very difficult for a parent who is completely unaccustomed to they, them pronouns and has been using other pronouns for their own child. And I had this conversation actually with a parent of an adult who was saying, I keep not using the they, them, and my child gets so angry at me. And I was able to give her, this mother, listening and compassion and go, "You're doing great. You care about this." I'm like, you want to hear some stories about my parents? And that was really, and that was really validating for her. And so when I look at a mother like that, who is loving and caring and well-intentioned and totally messing up the pronouns, and the adult child is getting very angry, what I would say is a parent like her needs and deserves spaces where
So
she
it's the
can
intent as well.
it's the intent, and she needs spaces of support. So where can she get those spaces of support? Who are the people in her community? Or can she join a support group? And my hope, honestly, is that a book like this can be a space of support, because there are 20 narrators in this book, and they are full of love and encouragement. They're telling their life stories. They're chronicling and testifying to their experiences as activists and as having shaped, the cultural innovations that we enjoy today. The amount of freedom that we do have as LGBTQ plus people, especially people of color and immigrants, is thanks to them and people like them who blazed the trails. And they also have all this encouragement in the later chapters, pearls of wisdom, visions for the future. And they have so much love for parents who are trying, whether they're getting it all right or not. And so my hope is honestly that these narrators could be good company for parents who want to try.
How did your own identity show up while gathering these stories?
What a good question. The timing was really incredible when I was offered this fellowship, because I have been openly queer all my adult life. I've identified as a lesbian. And I've always known that my gender internally was expansive. But I didn't fully step into realizing how queer my gender was, and that I really am sort of genderqueer and non-binary, and understanding that I'm part of the trans umbrella, the greater trans umbrella, until about a year before this fellowship began. So when I was collecting these stories, I was in my own sort of self-discovery and blossoming within my own gender. And I was having these, incredible experiences, certainly with my life being rearranged, but also with feeling this deeper level of well-being and inner freedom that was coming from affirming and embracing my whole gender and really understanding that I'm not a cis person and I get to have this and I get to be part of the trans spectrum. So collecting these stories and hearing from all of these people, some of whom are trans men and trans women, and some of whom don't fit either of those categories and are defying categories. Genderqueer people, non-binary people, gender fluid people, transmasculine, transfeminine people, two-spirit people, which is a Native American term and sensibility. So hearing all of these possibilities for how people experience and language gender was so freeing and powerful for me personally.
Caro, I'm a big proponent of hesitations, pauses, silence, and what it tells us, right? More than words. And I have asked my other guests this question, especially authors. Were there any stories that left you breathless or completely blown away, not just for what was said, but what wasn't? Those pauses, what did they tell you about the narratives?
It's so powerful that you're asking about pauses and silence, because that's actually one of the powerful things that I learned in the oral history training, was that oral historians came and gave us training, all of them professors from Columbia University's oral history master's degree, and all of them people of color. And more than one of them said, do not be afraid of the silence. In oral history, people will pause, and the impulse will be to fill that pause or silence. And sometimes in journalism, people will, they have a certain amount of time and they'll jump in. But in oral history, we let it linger on. And if you listen to the audio of these interviews, which are available online, you can hear these moments where people are silent and then they sort of fall back into it. Or they fall back into spaces of tenderness with themselves, which are incredibly hard won. And these really deep moments where I felt like people were even surprised by the tenderness with which they were able to hold their own memories.
Give me an example.
One example is Josenio Lewis, who was born in the United States, but a child of immigrants, Panamanian immigrants. He's Afro-Latino, he's Black and Latinx, and always felt Panamanian culture in his home. And he speaks later in the interview about how much it cost him to be Black and Latinx, not Latinx enough. For a lot of Latino people didn't register him as Latino because he, is Black. Black people were like, what are you doing with the plantains? And are you this or that? That otherness. And then in queer community, experiencing that otherness too around gender, going, I'm not really a lesbian. Oh, I'm a trans man. And going through that journey. He had so many experiences with not being seen, and his need to be seen and his feeling of not being seen even in his own communities drove him to become, this really trailblazing activist, one of the few Black Latinx trans men being public over the past 30 years. And so with all of that experience of not being seen, he had this story of being 3 years old and being seen by his 3-year-old friend. They were playing, and this friend was a boy. And he said, I have to go pee. And he went to use the bathroom. And it was the first time that Josenio saw as an assigned female at birth person that he didn't have the same parts as his friend. And he thought he was sick and that the part had fallen off. And so he said, we need to go to the hospital. There's something wrong with me. And the other little boy said, oh no, my dad explained it to me that mine is going to grow one day. And so yours will grow. And he said, I trusted my friend. He would never lie to me. And so at 3 years old, I got this affirmation. Oh, you're a boy. You're just like me. And I carried that with me. And it's just this little story from childhood. And it has some humor in it, of course, because it's, it's like these two kids, talking about their bodies and peeing and trying to figure it out, But it was also this very tender story about self-recognition that then connects to the need for self-recognition and for recognition from others that can drive our activism.
I was thinking this book centers queer trans elders of color, right? So people who've been erased twice, once by society for who they are, and again by history, because as you said, these stories were not documented. What does it mean to recover, in a way, these lives on their own terms?
I hope that it means a transformation of the archive. I hope that it means a transformation of our understanding of what our collective histories actually are. We have so much need to fill the silences and erasures that are part of our official and formal collective histories. Because trans and queer people of color have always been here. And I think, especially for those of us who are people of color, who are immigrants, and who are LGBTQ, we often feel like we don't have a history. And we do. We have an incredibly rich inheritance. And this is our inheritance.
Especially kids of immigrants, right? Because when I think of myself as an immigrant, I grew up in a different country. I spent formative years there. So, in some ways, I am confident in who I am and history associated with my identity. But my kids, they haven't seen that. And they've been given this narrative in the US, which unfortunately sometimes kids buy into. So to overcome that roadblock becomes an act of heroism and activism in itself.
It absolutely does, yes. It was really important for me to include immigrant, trans, and gender variant people in this book. And I think some of these stories, I hope, speak to people who are also searching for that kind of connectedness and roots. So Nikki Kalma immigrated from the Philippines as a young adult, and she tells this incredible story. Another one of the stories that just sort of moved me and blew me away when in the moment of the telling, which was she was 13 years old and she sees a trans woman for the first time, not knowing yet that she herself is a trans woman, trans girl at 13 years old. And she goes on vacation in the Philippines and sees this organist playing, and she's a trans woman. Her mind is blown, and she tries to talk to the woman, and she's tongue tied, and she describes it so vividly and sees a possibility for herself, but then also is in this very Catholic, homophobic, and transphobic family. And so she immigrated, overstayed her visa in the United States, and was undocumented for some time. And she did all of that so that she could seek out a place to be free. And so there are people in the book who immigrated to have the freedom to be their full queer trans self.
Caro, you mentioned in the beginning that when you went to Uruguay, you realized that the law had already changed there before it changed in the US, and you felt more liberated. Now, there is this misconception of, as you said in the beginning, that other countries are more conservative. US is so emancipated when it comes to rights across ethnicities, gender identities, sexual identities. But that is an actual misconception, right? That's the story that we are told. And that's probably what some immigrants buy into when they come to the United States, because they think that they may have more rights and they may be able to live life unapologetically as to who they are. Can you parse out fact from fiction for us, especially in this context?
That is a very complex question because even talking about, Nikki Calma's experience in the Philippines, right? This does not imply that there isn't, currently, especially today, a very rich LGBTQ plus community in the Philippines, even as there's also societal pushback. We certainly see societal pushback against LGBTQ rights here in the United States. We are not in any way immune to that. It is really important to hold that complexity. So one of the examples in the book is Nelson de Alerta Perez was, doing incredibly brave drag performances in Havana, Cuba, where she grew up. She dropped out of school at 17 because there was so much homophobic, transphobic bullying. Took a construction job and then used a piece of that money to rent a mansion every once in a while on a Saturday night and do drag performances. And she describes them so vividly. And, they would get packed with people. They would just hand out flyers on the beach and they would get packed with people. And the drag queens would descend these staircases of these old mansions and just do these glorious things. And I say glamorous because they were glamorous, but, they were using whatever they had, the simplest pieces of cloth to transform and celebrate themselves. And, Nelson would get arrested and tortured for these drag performances, which were against the law. And she eventually came to the United States as a refugee, as a young adult in the 80s. And I think those are really important stories. But they're important stories on a lot of levels, right? This is a story about authoritarianism and institutional repression. But we are looking at the machinery of authoritarianism right now here in the United States. So it's problematic to look at a story like that and go, oh, let's point the finger at Cuba. Let's point the finger at Latin America as this backward place. Instead, I think we can draw inspiration from these incredible immigrant stories of having resisted authoritarianism, of having affirmed joy and community and self-expression and possibility, against the odds in the presence of authoritarianism, the power of defiant joy. Well, this is something that I think we can draw on and learn from where we are right now, today in the United States.
Caro, as you're telling these stories, I can see the sparkle in your eyes. I can see how passionate and how connected you are to these stories. If you could preserve just one line, and I'm going to make it very hard for you.
Oh no, this is sounding really hard.
One moment from So Many Stars as a tagline, as a learning experience for future generations, what would it be?
I would choose the last line of the book, which is from Nelson de Alerta Perez, the Cuban drag queen I just described. There is room for all of us in this world. Fight for it. It's right there. All you have to do is claim it.
Tell me, why So Many Stars? Why this title?
The title came to me in one of the interviews with an incredible elder and activist and artist, Crystal Mason. And I had asked them about what it meant to them to adopt they, them pronouns in their 60s. When living in their 60s, and I think in mainstream society, we sort of associate they, them pronouns more with younger generations, but here they are, and in their 60s, always having known about their internal masculinity and their gender queerness. And they used a metaphor, and they said, when you go out into the country and you look up at the night sky, you see a sky full of stars. And the more stars there are, the more possibilities. More stars is more possibilities. And if we have so many stars, then we have more ways of being human and free. And so they said, this is how I think about language. When we think about the expansion of language, new pronouns, new words for our genders, the lexicon that keeps growing, the LGBTQ plus lexicon, we don't have to be afraid of it. We can embrace it because it means so many ways of being, so many possibilities, and so much brightness to bring into the world. And when they said that, in the interview, I thought, I have a dream of gathering these voices into a book so they can reach even more people and hopefully nourish and inspire people. And if I'm able to make that happen, I would like to name it So Many Stars.
In the end, if you were to define the United States of America in a word or a sentence, in the context of what's happening, how would you do that?
I would define the United States as an ongoing place of brutality, heartbreak, possibility, community, and dreams.
Caro, this was so good. Where can people find this book?
The book is available wherever books are sold. It is at bookstores, it's online. If you order it from Booksmith in San Francisco, you can request a signature and I can dedicate it to anyone you like. I can draw little stars of hope and radiance on the cover, on the title page. I'm happy to dedicate copies that are requested or ordered through Booksmith San Francisco. I'm also going on an 11-city book tour and would love to be in conversation with people.
Are you going to be in New York?
I am going to be in New York, yes.
Oh my gosh, we should meet up.
Oh, I would love that. Yes, June 3rd and 4th, I'm doing events.
We should absolutely make plans to meet up. Thank you, Caro. This was so good.
Thank you for the incredible conversation. It is such an honor to be here with you talking about immigrant joy and love and life.
You know, I started my conversation with a reflection today, and I'm going to end it with another reflection based on what Caro said. If we could really create space for all of us, we don't have to fully understand them. We don't have to fully connect with them. But if we respect their humanity and dignity and create space for all human beings to exist, thrive, and be joyous, then we've done what we were supposed to do as humans. This episode is written and produced by me, Saadia Khan. Editorial review is done by Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Lou Raskin. Theme music is done by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Come back next week for another important conversation. Take care.